At the edge of a grain store, a hand presses a reed into wet clay. The basket beside it is ordinary barley. Dust. A delivery that will be eaten, stored, owed, or argued over later. The hand is doing something strange. It is making the clay remember. Not the warmth of the worker who carried the grain. Not the smell of the room. Not the tone of the promise at the doorway. It keeps the part a larger order cannot afford to lose. A quantity. A claim. A trace that can survive after every voice in the room has gone quiet. Why would a human society need memory that has no brain? A small group can carry much of its world in living minds. People remember the trail that turns muddy after rain. They remember the plant that heals and the one that harms. They remember who helped last winter and who cannot be trusted near a quarrel. That is not weak memory. It is memory built for a world with faces, places, seasons, and consequences close enough to feel. But the field and the storehouse change the problem. A settled order wants to know which field belongs to whom after the harvest. It wants to know how much grain came in before the bad year. It wants to know who has paid and who still owes. It wants to know what can be demanded when the next project begins. Now the memory load is no longer just a story told well. It is arithmetic spread across strangers. One mind can remember a promise. A kingdom needs to compare promises it did not hear. That is where remembered speech starts to strain. Brains are finite. Brains die. Brains excel at some patterns and stumble over others. A world of debts and taxes asks people to keep too many exact numbers alive at once. Stores, fields, and dates pile onto the same burden. When the numbers slip, the order slips with them. In the muddy plains of southern Mesopotamia, one answer took shape in a material that could wait. Clay was soft under a stylus and stubborn after it dried. A mark could stand for a quantity. Another mark could point toward grain or labor. It could point toward animals, land, or a person tied to the transaction. The earliest records were not grand speeches from civilization announcing itself. They were practical. Goods moved. Rations were counted. Institutions needed receipts for a world that had grown too busy for trust alone. That modest beginning matters. Writing arrives in our imagination wearing the robes of literature. Poems. Letters. Laws. Sacred books. But before the record becomes a voice for every part of speech, it can be a narrow tool for keeping count. It can remember what a mouth cannot repeat accurately enough for an archive. The tablet does not merely extend one clever clerk. It changes what the whole system can do. A delivery can outlast the deliverer. A debt can wait for a new official. A field claim can return years later with a hard little witness made of mud. For a crowded order, that is relief. For the person being recorded, it is something more complicated. Imagine two families meeting at the edge of a field after a dry season. One says the land was sold long ago. The other says it was only lent until the debt was cleared. Nobody in the room can recover the vanished conversation with perfect honesty. Even if an elder remembers, another elder may remember differently. So they go looking for the record. That search reveals the second problem. Storing memory is not the same as finding it again. 10 tablets are an aid. 10,000 tablets are a room full of mute stones unless someone knows which shelf, which category, which hand, and which sign can bring the right claim back into daylight. The archive needs training. It needs people who can sort. It needs forms that make one dispute resemble another. It needs a habit of separating fields from marriages. It needs a habit of separating rations from penalties and taxes from songs. None of that makes the record just. A tablet can preserve a fair payment. It can preserve a false accusation. It can preserve an unequal rule so well that the rule reaches people who never met the person who first spoke it. External memory is power because it lasts and travels inside institutions. The archive can rescue a promise from forgetfulness. It can also make the promise harder to escape. Clay is not the only way a large order can push memory outside the head. High in the Andes, chords could carry a count. Khipu use knots, color, placement, and fiber instead of ink on a page. They were part of Inka record-keeping across a vast empire. They remind us not to mistake our own picture of writing for the only possible technology of memory. They also force a useful caveat. Much of their surviving meaning is difficult to recover. Scholars still debate how far particular chords reached beyond numerical records. A knot system can be powerful without becoming a sentence in the way a modern reader expects. That is the deeper point. An empire does not first ask whether its memory looks like our alphabet. It asks whether stores can be counted, obligations tracked, and information carried far enough to make command possible. On clay or cord, the record is a bridge between strangers who will never share one recollection. Once memory lives outside the skull, people must learn the habits of the thing they built. A living mind leaps by association. A face recalls a doorway. The doorway recalls a wedding. The wedding recalls a song. An archive punishes that drift. It asks where the field deed belongs. It asks which list contains the ration. It asks whether a person fits this row or that row before the search can continue. So scribes and clerks become part of the machine. They learn marks and tables. They learn categories, repetition, and retrieval. Over time, the record grows more expressive. It can carry letters and poems. It can carry decrees and prayers. Yet the old pressure never disappears. The large order still wants a count that can be stored, checked, and compared. Later it finds ledgers. Then forms. Then spreadsheets. Then databases that move through rooms no one calls an archive anymore. Each step sounds like convenience. Often it is. But convenience has a shape. What can be entered cleanly becomes easy to notice. What cannot fit the field becomes easier to ignore. Return to the hand at the grain store. The clay receives the mark without understanding hunger, fatigue, or fear. That is exactly why the larger system wants it. The mark does not get tired. It does not die before the next official arrives. It waits. Human beings built that waiting memory because remembered speech could not carry every store, debt, field, and stranger into the future. The gift is enormous. Cities can coordinate. Promises can travel. Knowledge can survive a body. The cost is quieter. Once a system can remember you as a quantity or a claim, it can sort you by the same cold discipline. It can decide which record counts and which voice arrives too late. The first memory outside the skull did not end human forgetting. It taught power how to remember.